All right, these notes go in your HBS comp book. These are continuing on with the nervous system. So we did some of the lobes, parts of the central peripheral nervous system in terms before. So now we're going to take a look at the regions and look at the functions of those regions. So I am on this page right here. In our foldable for our tissue foldable, when we looked at nervous tissue, it had neuron and glial cells there. So neuron is a nerve cell, like osteocyte is a bone cell, myocyte, muscle cell. Neuron is a nerve cell. And the glial cells, glia, they're support cells, so they help to support the neurons. All right, so major regions of the brain: hindbrain, midbrain, forebrain. So we'll take a look at what composes each one of those and the basic function of each one of those regions. So I've got these divided right here. Forebrain. The forebrain is composed of the cerebral hemispheres, the thalamus, and the hypothalamus. The forebrain is composed of the cerebral hemispheres, the thalamus, and the hypothalamus. Main function is processing information for cognitive activities, sensory functions, and voluntary motor activities. Forebrain's main function is processing information for cognitive activities, sensory functions, and voluntary motor activities. The midbrain connects the pons and the cerebellum to the forebrain within the brainstem. So this is a region of the brain that connects the pons and cerebellum to the forebrain within the brainstem. Major functions: motor movement, auditory and visual processing. Motor movement, auditory and visual processing. Then the hindbrain, composed of the medulla oblongata, the pons, and the cerebellum. Composed of the medulla oblongata, the pons, and the cerebellum. It coordinates functions fundamental to survival. So our hindbrain coordinates functions fundamental to survival: your heart rate, your respiratory rhythm, your sleeping and waking cycles, those sort of things. All right, so now we're going to get into the functions of different regions of the brain. We're going to start with sensory cortex and motor cortex. So sensory cortex and motor cortex we have on this image right here, but I've got their functions on the next page. So this is a separate picture, and we'll get to this in just a minute. I have this one on top. All right, motor cortex. So I've got it highlighted the same color as what I have it colored in on that previous picture. Motor cortex, precentral gyrus. This is involved with planning, control, and execution of voluntary movements. Motor cortex, precentral gyrus, involved in planning, control, and execution of voluntary movements. Sensory cortex. Sensory cortex, somatosensory cortex, or postcentral gyrus. This plays a role in sensory perception, such as heat, touch, and pain. Nociception. Sensory cortex, postcentral gyrus, plays a role in sensory perception, such as heat, touch, and pain. Nociception. All right, so now we're getting into this picture right here. So, on this picture, remember, this is all the cerebrum. This is the cerebral cortex. This is our cerebellum. Cerebellum. This sort of band-like structure right here is the corpus callosum. Under the corpus callosum is the thalamus. Under the thalamus is the hypothalamus. So we have thalamus and hypothalamus. Hypo, low. I have an M here to represent the area of the midbrain. I have an A for the general area of our amygdala. An H for a general area of the hippocampus. This gland that comes off the hypothalamus is the pituitary gland. This bump, if you will, right here, this represents the pons. The medulla oblongata then will turn into the spinal cord. I have this outlined in blue because it represents the brainstem. Okay. Oh, and olfactory bulb would be right here. So olfactory bulb processes the sense of smell. Most of the rest of the regions are on the insert. A few things that I have added here. Let's see. Frontal lobe, speech production, so Broca's area. Movement, motor cortex. Oh, and frontal lobe I've added on here. So we've also got impulse control, judgment, problem solving, those kind of things that we talked about in terms of the frontal lobe before. Temporal lobe, I added Wernicke's area. That's the processing. Broca's speech production, Wernicke's processing auditory information, processing language. Limbic system, lots of emotions involved here. The amygdala, fear, emotions, memory are associated with the amygdala. Medulla oblongata, blood pressure regulation, heart rate, breathing rate. Pons, breathing, information. Oops, here we go. I don't know if you can see that or not anyway. You can probably put it in a better place than what I did. Breathing, information from the cerebrum, cerebellum, and spinal cord. Hypothalamus, hunger and thirst. Thalamus, relay sensory information from sensory receptors to the proper area of the brain to be processed. So thalamus is kind of like a mail sorting area, gets information in there, and then it decides where does this information from the sensory receptors need to go. So relay information from sensory receptors to a proper area of the brain to be processed. Hippocampus, long-term memory and emotions. And so hippocampus up here was where emotions were at. And so a lot of times our long-term memory is associated with emotions. Wernicke's area, process what you hear. Language development, that's what that abbreviation is, language development. And then Broca's area, speech production. Wernicke's process what you hear, language development. Broca's area, speech production.